Hey everybody, welcome back to Video. So today we're going to be continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and of course we have more Sega Saturn Core updates and more game tests. Because since this thing has gone to update all, there's been a lot of improvements on other games, some of which we've never shown on the channel so far in the testing series, so it's going to be a fun time. If we're too far involved, then it'd be a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But let's get right into some Sega Saturn testing today, and we're going to start it off with a fighting game, one of my favorites of all time, and that is Waku Waku 7. Now I know this game exists on the Neo Geo AES and MVS core, and that is where I would recommend to play it, but this has seen graphical improvements in the backgrounds with some sort of tearing on the screen going on, so whatever was happening in VDP1 or VDP2 on that layer has been 100% fixed. And it's not like the Sega Saturn version of this game isn't an incredible experience as well, it's just one of those things that also gets replicated on the Neo Geo core. But it's always great to see these visual improvements come to MiSTer FPGA and the Saturn side of things, and honestly, if you want to sit down and play Waku Waku 7 today, you can play it from start to finish. You can see the credits scroll, you can have a fun time single player, or obviously it's going to be a lot better with a friend and a second controller in the mix. And this game just has so much charm and so much personality. It's one of the most colorful Neo Geo games, and that translates so well over to the Sega Saturn. This is the type of game that immediately puts a smile on your face. You have so much fun playing it, and here today in the current Sega Saturn core, you're having a great experience. And it's not like it wasn't playable before, but it's probably been like 4 or 5 months since we talked about this game. It's just that it had graphical glitches, but those have all been fixed up in recent core updates, so now when you sit down and play, it's another game where you'd be hard pressed to tell whether you were on real Sega Saturn hardware or MiSTer FPGA. And again, if you've never played this before, definitely check it out. It is so fun and charming and colorful. It's such an interesting experience. Atlus made some incredible fighting games back in the Neo Geo era, and they are just one of those developers that do so many fun things. And if you actually want to buy a copy of this game on the Neo Geo AES, you better bring your wallet, because you're probably talking 2 to 3 mortgage payments depending on where you live and what your mortgage is. But I have always loved Waku Waku 7. It just has everything I need out of a fighting game, including that weird charm and sense of humor something like Matra Melee would have. And it is just so fun to play on the current core. And the best part is, because this is MiSTer, there's basically no latency whatsoever, so you will live or die by your skill set, and no latency in the input controls, which is definitely something on the FPGA side, which is a huge benefit to players. And honestly, playing 2D fighting games on Sega Saturn is always a great time because there's such an amazing library, and even though a lot of these games are replicated across different arcade cores, there's always some special features or other bonus content on the Sega Saturn disc that you can check out. But speaking of amazing fighting games, and one that people don't talk about all too often, is Groove on Fight. This also had an issue with some of the background artwork, and that's also been fixed up in recent core updates. And it's no surprise, these are 2 fighting games both published by Atlus, so there's probably some sort of shared code in between them, so patching up one bug probably patched up the other. And it's got the most vibey, interesting track sequence here in the beginning of the game. And I mentioned Matra Melee earlier. This is part of the Power Instinct series, but it took it in a little bit of a darker direction. But this is an awesome game, and if you've never played it before, I can't recommend it enough. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, have you played Groove on Fight? Did you know it existed? Because I feel like of all the games in the Power Instinct series, this is the one that everyone forget actually does exist. But it is a ton of fun, and just like Waku Waku 7, in the current core, it's an absolutely amazing experience. The controls, the graphic, the music, the sound effects, everything here is running like it should on real Sega Saturn hardware. So this is another game that you can just sit down and experience like you were using real hardware, and you would be very hard pressed to tell the difference. And the last time we talked about this game as well, it had a lot of pops and crackle in the soundtrack. That has all been patched up in intervening cores as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let you listen to the soundtrack for 35 seconds or so, but come back because I got more games to show you that have seen recent improvements on the cores. But this soundtrack is totally good. Every single Power Instinct game has an awesome soundtrack, with Master Melee being my favorite, but Groove on Fight is definitely very dramatic, and it sounds great coming out of the core here, and I love the dark artwork and otherwise horror nature of this game. But speaking of dark and a little bit horror-y, let's take a look at Hexen. Now, of course, again, there's multiple ways to play this game, and you can definitely play it on PC, on DOS. It's a ton of fun however you play it. But if you've never played Hexen before, do be aware that this is the most convoluted, puzzly, switchy game ever known to man as far as the old school 90s first-person shooters are concerned. You're either going to absolutely love it or absolutely hate it for that. But interestingly enough, Sega Saturn is one of the ways I played this back in the day. I had it on DOS, but for some reason I lost my copy, and then I picked up a copy on Sega Saturn, so the first time I actually finished Hexen was on Sega Saturn. It's not the best frame rate you're going to get for this game, but it is another game that's seen a lot of visual improvements and a lot of sound improvements as well. And it is just a fun time to see these PC games running on Sega Saturn, because this was the era for PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64, and Saturn, where you would see a lot of the most popular PC games, things like Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, Quake, Heretic, Hexen, come over to consoles in one form or another. So seeing it running here on the Saturn is a good time, and it's interesting how it lays up all the graphics with VDP1 and VDP2, because this is a full 2D space, and it's just using engine trickery to appear as 3D, which was always a really interesting thing back in the day, that a lot of times that you saw these games, you thought they were in a 3D space and they weren't. But all of the different effects here on Saturn, all of the motion, all of the controls are coming across really well. So if you want to sit down and play Hexen on Saturn today, you can do that. But don't forget, there's other amazing first-person shooters on the Saturn as well, Power Slave probably being my favorite. But Hexen was a huge deal back in the day. We got Heretic, we got Hexen, and then from there the franchise got a little bit worse with the 3D entries. I really wish we got a Heretic 2 that was basically in the same art style, and I kind of wish the developers, maybe Raven, could get the rights back and make a new Heretic or Hexen game today. But in lieu of that, we still have the Sega Saturn version, and it is a ton of fun. But tell me down below if you played Heretic or Hexen back in the day. I would be curious. I would say Heretic's my favorite of the two, but Hexen is a good time, and I'm assuming most people, if they did play it, probably didn't do it on the Sega Saturn because it was a great port, but for the most part, if you had a PC, that's where you're going to play it. But it's seen a lot of improvements on the core visually as well as on the audio side, so this today seems to be like a 10 out of 10 experience in my opinion. Now, another game that everyone's wanted to see retested based on comments, and one that's seen a lot of visual improvements as well, is Thunder Force V, or Thunder Force 5, depending on how you want me to say it. And this is another awesome shmup on a console that is known for having awesome shmups. I would put this in like the B+ to A- tier as far as Saturn is concerned, but you tell me down below what you think about it. But again, it's so much fun to see all the improvements come in. Now that we have a new core and update all, and now that the Saturn feels like it's getting close to the finish line, it is just these little visual fixes and bugs that are going to come across in the core. Now, of course, we still have some games that don't work whatsoever, at least at the point in time that I'm recording this, so it isn't like Sega Saturn is done, but we're getting really close to the end, it feels like, which is always awesome. But games like Thunder Force here are just so synonymous with the Sega Saturn. If you look up a list of best shmups of all time, this game is generally going to show up, especially if it's Sega Saturn focused. I love the mix of 3D and 2D and how they have that infinite plane scrolling around with VDP. This is an effect that you would see a lot on Sega Saturn, whether it was Virtual Fighter, any of the Panzer Dragoon games, or Thunder Force like you're looking at right now. It really does sell the illusion of that ocean going to infinity, the way it scrolls, and you add in the skybox and the 3D models for the enemies, in this instance, this kind of phoenix looking boss right here, and it just looks so much fun in motion. But this is the type of game, it runs across really well as far as a capture on a capture card is concerned, but if you put this on a CRT television, the blending and just the overall look are so much better, because so many of these transparencies are obviously just dithering patterns, and those blend together so much better if you're actually on a CRT television. And if you haven't tested this yet on CRT, definitely give it a shot. It's not a perfect implementation yet, but it's a lot of fun to look at, and I do think Sega Saturn is one of the consoles that most benefits from having having that old 2 TV, whether you're on composite S-video, component, or RGB in my instance on my Sony PVMs. As we move to the next stage, you'll just see there's really nothing to see here that doesn't look correct. If you notice anything, leave me a comment down below, but to my eye, I'm really not detecting much of anything, but it's been a few years since I've actually played Thunder Force, and big thanks to Andy D for helping with some of the captures this week as well. I've had quite a busy week going on. But when we get into this area, we have the fog in the front as far as layers are scrolling. We have that dithering light coming through. It is just such a really interesting look, with even the grass scrolling at a different rate for that parallax scrolling effect. This game puts up so many different effects on screen at once, and they all seem to be working super well here on the Sega Saturn Core. So if you haven't played Thunder Force in a while on Saturn, especially on the Core, give it a shot. I think you're going to be very excited. Now onto one of the smallest fixes as far as the Core is concerned that is the most apparent is going to be the manuals in Sonic Jam. I'll give you a little look at what it currently looks like to run around the world in 3D in Sonic Jam, and I really wish that Sega had just made this into a full game. We really got screwed on Saturn when it came to 3D Sonic games. But let's move into the manual section. In each cartridge you're going to get options. You're going to be able to see the manual for that game. This is what it currently looks like on the current Core after it was fixed. Once you zoom into the text, you're going to notice that everything is legible and readable. It's not the clearest because of course the resolution is low, but as we scroll in here, you're going to see that you can understand these are words and you're going to be able to read them. If we move back over to the previous Core and do the exact same thing, you're going to see that nothing is going to display correctly. It has this staggered staccato look to it, like none of the layers are actually appearing in the order in which they should. So on the most current Core, if you want to read the manuals for the Sonic games on Genesis, you can do that. But that's the situation with the most recent Sega Saturn Core. There's been a lot of improvements, and I will definitely do another one of these testing videos when there's more games that have seen fixes. But if you have any recommendations for games you want to see, either that I've never tested or haven't tested in a long time, leave me a comment down below, because I do try to get to each and every one of them, but it does take me a minute to loop back around to all your requests. But short of that, if you're not playing Sega Saturn on MiSTer FPGA today, you 100% should start playing it. Short of that, we'll see you next time there's a Core update, but I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.